But what I did was block my parents because I didn't have any intention of talking to them anymore. I knew they were legally bound to keep sending money for me until I turned 18, and apart from that, I didn't think I had any reason to speak to them anymore. My aunt was also fine with it, and if my dad had tried to contact her in the next few days, she didn't inform me about it, and we pretended nothing had happened at all, which meant that she was on my side and supported whatever I'd done. That was enough for me, and it was all the support I wanted or needed. For the past week, I barely had any contact with my parents, but today, they showed up outside my school while I was about to leave and they looked pissed. My friends were all well aware of the situation between me and my parents, so they accompanied me outside and kind of acted like a human shield around me so I wouldn't have to interact with them if I didn't want to, but they kept yelling out my name and I had to respond. I walked right up to both of them and told them that I didn't want anything to do with them anymore, but they didn't pay any heed to that and told me that I needed to come home with them right away. I didn't understand why all of a sudden they wanted me to return with them when they'd made it so clear in the past that I was not a priority for them at all, and felt like this was just them trying to redeem their image and reputation among their family members. So I told them that I wasn't going anywhere with them until they told me what was going on, as a way to try and get to know why they were acting like this all of a sudden. On one hand, they looked pissed off, and on the other, they still wanted me to come back home with them. They told me that they didn't want my friends hearing this, so I told them to back off a little so I could speak to them in private. Once my friends were out of earshot, my parents told me that they were here to take me back because I wasn't answering any of their calls or texts and they needed me to come back so that they'd be able to get their inheritance still. They explained that after I'd made that post, pretty much everyone in the family had become aware of the situation and it had reached my grandparents. My paternal grandparents are quite well off, and they threatened my dad by saying that if they continued to treat me like this, then he'd lose his inheritance. They'd been told that if they didn't try and reconcile with me, treat me better, and make sure I was loved and looked after, then whatever my father was supposed to inherit would end up going to my aunt, since she was the one taking care of me even though she didn't need to. And my dad couldn't afford to lose the inheritance because it was a significant amount of money. My parents had a decent combined income of their own, but I know that had I been in their place, I probably would have also wanted the same thing for myself. The only difference is that I would have had enough brains not to make it seem like I was doing me a favor by saying that they'd take me back, because they weren't doing me a favor. They were doing this for themselves and not for me, and even then they didn't have the common sense to at least act like they were willing to let me live with them. So I said that I didn't care about whether they got their inheritance or not and walked away without bothering to wait and hear them out, even as they screamed at me to come back. I took the bus back to my aunt's house and told her what had happened at school, and she seemed annoyed as well. To ensure that this doesn't happen again, she's contacted her lawyer so we can do something about my custody. Of course, it's still my parents who still have the rights over me, and that has to be changed if I want to live with my aunt. I also called up and thanked my grandparents for trying to fix this, but I also told them that I really didn't want to go back to living with my parents, because now that I'd spent a couple of days living with my aunt, I finally felt like I was free. Living with my parents had been nothing short of suffocating, and I'd kept hoping that things would change, but they never did. My grandparents didn't live in the same city, so we didn't meet often, but whenever we did, at family gatherings and the holidays, my parents were always on their best behavior so they wouldn't know how I was treated at home. It wasn't as if I was treated with cruelty, but it was more like ignorance and avoidance. On the surface, it all seemed fine, but if people spent a couple of days with me at my parents' house, they'd know that they mostly pretended I wasn't even there and cared only about my sister. And after she got pregnant, that just got worse and I was pushed to the sidelines altogether. So I told my grandparents all of this, and they reassured me that if that's what I wanted, to live with my aunt, then they'd make sure that it happened, and if my parents signed away their rights, then they'd make sure everything I needed was paid for by them. I was happy after that conversation because things were finally looking up for me, but it didn't last long, since I just received an email from my dad a couple of hours back. It was not hateful or mean, but just disappointing. He said that there was no need for me to post what had happened online and make this so public when the word of what had happened would have reached my grandparents anyway through my aunt. But now, along with my grandparents being mad at them, they also have to deal with a ton of hate from their relatives, and they're being ostracized, which seems unfair. He told me that even some of his co-workers found out about this because the post was public and it had shown up on their feed since he was tagged in it. This wasn't a good look for him at work, and what I'd done had just caused a lot of unnecessary drama in their lives, according to me. So Ida for posting about how my parents asked me to leave the house and move in with my aunt on my 16th birthday because my sister was pregnant and they needed my room for the baby?